Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. We have a very special guest in the studio, returning Congressman Adam Schiff, who represents the 28th Congressional District in California. Welcome back, Congressman.
Great to be with you.
It's always good to have you here, and we do have a lot to talk about, so let's get started. But first, last week, the White House announced that it will put on exhibit the so-called Armenian Orphan Rug, which is a rug woven by orphans of the Armenian Genocide. And it created a controversy last year when, at the last minute, the White House decided not to allow the rug to be displayed at a Smithsonian exhibit. You were at the forefront of the movement to kind of get the rug out from hiding. So if you can talk about some of the backstage machinations, I think it's a very interesting story.
Well, it's kind of staggering. As you point out, it's taken us about a year to get this rug displayed, but as you mentioned, it was going to be displayed at the Smithsonian in connection with a book that had come out about Near East relief and about the rug itself. But ultimately, the White House decided that it could not be displayed in connection with a book, private book sale. At that point, I offered to host a reception highlighting the work of the Near East Relief Agency, having nothing to do with the book, and we still ran into a lot of resistance, which has taken time to overcome. Many in the community, I think, suspect, and I tend to agree, that the appropriateness of a book signing may be one thing, but it was much more likely connected to resistance or Turkish sensibilities than anything else, at least the delay in getting this exhibited. But we have overcome that. It will be now displayed in the White House Visitor Center beginning November 18th for about a week. It's not something people need a reservation for or a White House tour for. If they can come to DC, they'll be able to see the rug. I've made a request that we be able to hold a reception for the Armenian community around its display, and we're waiting to hear on that. But either way, I'm very pleased that finally, and it shouldn't have taken this long, this rug that was woven by these orphans of the genocide is going to be displayed. And I think it's very important for a couple reasons. One, because it's such a powerful and tangible symbol of the genocide itself, literally woven by the fingers of the survivors. But also because it is part of an American story, and that is this Near East Relief Agency was unprecedented. It raised, in real today dollar terms, over $1 billion from all over the world to help the survivors of the genocide. That's really an important story also to be told, because I think the work of that agency gave rise to a lot of American foreign assistance programs that have continued to this day around the world.
And this whole conjecture about the Turkish role in forbidding the exhibit of the rug actually came out from the Washington Post. But even reporting on last week's developments, there is a hesitance from the White House once again to actually characterize the events of 1915 as genocide, which is also, as you explained, the kind of ignoring American history as well. Why is this happening?
Well, and this is really a central point, and that is America, the administration, our Congress, needs to recognize the Armenian genocide. It needs to stop equivocating or using euphemisms that insult the memory of those that were lost. But this puts the administration in a quandary. How do they display this relic of the genocide without calling it what it is? So it will be interesting to see how it's described in the exhibit. Right now, and I think up until April of next year, we need to be making an effort every day vis-a-vis the Congress and the administration to get our government to recognize the genocide as we come up to the centennial. So it's my hope that we view this as one step along that path. I don't have any illusions that on November 24th or November 18th rather, when this is exhibited, that they're going to have a placard saying this was made by victims of the genocide, much as I'd like to see that.
Yeah.
But I'm hoping that this is beginning to wear down some of the resistance that we're meeting. Many nations around the world have recognized the genocide. They have lived to tell the tale. America, I think, needs to do so, both because we have a moral obligation to those lost, but also because it's very hard to be the moral leader of the world, of the free world, if we equivocate when it comes to genocide.
So to our viewers, the Orphan Rug will be on display from November 18th to the 23rd.
Correct.
At the White House Visitor Center, and you can log on to their website, which I believe is whitehousevisitors.gov, and get the information. It's free and open to the public. So if you plan on being in Washington or plan to fly out there for this particular exhibit, do so, and hopefully it'll be a great event, and we'll all come together in DC for it.
I'm really looking forward to seeing it. I've never seen it, and I have seen some very powerful slides just here in the Alex Theater for last year's commemoration that showed not only the rug, but also showed, I think, one of the most powerful scenes taken from the rooftop of a building. Thousands and thousands of orphan children spelling out the words "thank you" to America for their support. Really quite breathtaking and powerful. One of the things that I'm trying to order from my office is there were, and this was also part of the exhibit at the Alex, there were posters at the time of Uncle Sam holding an Armenian orphan. It had penetrated to that degree in terms of the United States and our identity as someone helping those in need.
Actually, that's why the Armenian National Committee of Western America Western Region has started this initiative called America We Thank You, to not simply thank America for its role in saving the survivors and especially the orphans of the genocide, but also to kind of begin sensitizing the American public about the important role it has played in the salvation of an entire nation, and that is quite a profound image where it says "America, we thank you." Actually, that orphanage still, the building is there in Gyumri, Armenia. And I've had a chance to visit it when I was there.
Wow.
It's a really incredible and powerful story. What I guess my question is, and if you can add to this, why is it I went through American public schools and took American history but never came across that? Why is this critical component, and as you said, it gave rise to today's America's Assistance Program. Why is this not being highlighted more?
Well, it's a very good question, and I don't think you can trace the absence of that in the curriculum when you and I were growing up. I don't think that was as much opposition by Turkey. I think the virulent fights against recognition are a more modern phenomenon. Reagan spoke of the genocide. We have recognized the genocide in the Congress during the 1980s. And so I'm not sure what the answer is, except that it's not a period of history that Americans have really focused on or turned to. We have certainly covered World War I and World War II. But looking beyond that to what happened to the Armenians, to the first genocide of the last century, up until very recently, that just wasn't a part of the curriculum in most schools. And while it was certainly deeply ingrained within the Armenian community because it had been so deeply touched, outside of that community, there are, I think, very few people who understood what took place between 1915 and 1923 and how 1.5 million people were wiped out in that first genocide.
And having just following the ANCA initiative, this was everyone's cause. There was, Golden Rule Sunday, where people didn't eat their Sunday meals and gave the money to the Armenian orphans and all of that. It was such a fabric of our country that hopefully 100 years later it'll begin resonating for a new generation.
Absolutely, and you're right. It was part of the lexicon at the time. And while these events were going on, not only our own Ambassador Morgenthau was documenting them, but in the cover of the New York Times, it was talking about the massacres of the Armenians. While the events were going on, the word genocide had not been invented yet, so that word wasn't being used. But certainly Americans were very knowledgeable at the time. But then we seem to have gone into this period of neglect, where we ignored that dark chapter of the world's history. And now I think this is a very important effort by ANCA Western Region to put a spotlight not only on the genocide, but also on the American response.
So hopefully we'll all get together in December in Washington to get a first glimpse of the rug. And when we come back, I really want to talk about what's going on right now in the Middle East with the whole alliance fight against ISIS. So stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone. If you are just joining us, my guest this evening in the studio is Representative Adam Schiff, who represents the 28th Congressional District in California in Congress. Welcome back again, Congressman. In the last segment, we talked about the rug and some of the issues that were surrounding it, but I can't help but look back 100 years and look at where the hot spot is right now and see some of the stark similarities in what's going on. The U.S. fight against ISIS right now and the coalition building that's going on. Turkey seems to be dragging its feet again, but I'm not seeing any type of administration response, kind of a hard administration response for a NATO ally. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think the most direct conflict we've had yet with Turkey has been over Kobani, this Kurdish Syrian town that's right there on the border with Turkey. That was besieged and still is besieged by ISIS fighters, surrounded, I think, on three sides. And Turkey was preventing refugees from getting out and preventing aid and military support from getting in. It was one thing not to provide support itself, which we would have been eager to see Turkey do, but to stand in the way of relief getting in and fighters getting in to try to help, that was unconscionable. And we have put pressure on Turkey over that. And in fact, we recently did airdrops of medical supplies, of weapons, to help resupply the Kurds in Kobani. That was over the objections of Turkey. Turkey has, at least in principle now, agreed to allow Iraqi Kurdish fighters to transit through Turkey to get to Kobani. There are, as you might imagine, very complicated tensions within this whole fight, but even among the Turks and the Kurds. And there's a difference between the Iraqi Kurds and the Syrian Kurds. The Iraqi and Syrian Kurds, depending on what parties they belong to, which has resulted in this rather circuitous way of helping to resupply Kobani. Many suspect that while Turkey said it didn't want Kobani to fall, it may have been more than happy to see fighters associated with the PKK, this party, political party that has been designated as working in combination with terrorists, to be under onslaught by ISIS forces. But all this points out the difficulty that we've had in getting Turkey mobilized. They have been, thus far, a very reluctant partner in the coalition to fight ISIS. Earlier on, Turkey had a very open border, and a lot of ISIS fighters could get into Syria by transiting through Turkey. Turkey was the main hub for fighters going in. And whether this was done deliberately or not, I think the reality is that Turkey welcomed sort of all comers that were willing to fight the regime of Bashar al-Assad. Similarly, some of the Gulf nations sent their funding and supplies to anyone fighting the regime, even though we and others were warning both Turkey and our Gulf allies that we need to be very careful about who we're supporting in the region, because there are some very bad actors there. Chief among them ISIS, but also the official franchise of al-Qaeda, al-Nusra. So, there's a continuing responsibility for those Gulf allies, as well as Turkey, to clamp down on weapons and money getting to the ISIS fighters. We also need Turkey to do a much better job on stopping the flow of oil by ISIS smuggled through Turkey and sold on the market, because this is helping to fund this terrorist organization.
It's interesting because the Armenian community has insisted that Turkey has had a role in a lot of the skirmishes that have been going on in Syria over the last 3 years, but specifically last March, when the whole Kesap situation blew up, there was a delegation of Armenian Americans who met with some State Department officials to kind of sensitize the State Department about this issue. Not that they didn't know, but there was a full-on rejection. So what was really interesting was the former Turkish ambassador, Francis Richardion, who went on record to say that we knew that Turkey was supporting Al-Qaeda and al-Nusra against the U.S.'s wishes, but they were doing it throughout the conflict. So how is there, and now there are calls by some very venerable media outlets saying Turkey should be let out of NATO. I mean, is this not, this is not how an ally is supposed to behave. Why is the State Department continuously apologizing, thanking, and somehow just continuing this love affair with this government that wants to do whatever it wants to do?
Well, you know, I think we have to really be much stronger in terms of communicating with Turkey what it is we need. And it begins with really closing the door to foreign fighters going into Iraq and Syria, and it continues with closing the door to revenue coming out. We want them to be an active part of the coalition fighting against ISIS. You know, they would be content, I'm sure, as would other nations of the region, for us to do all the fighting for them. That's not going to happen. And I think the President has sensibly provided the air support. We've provided, the United States has provided humanitarian relief to those in the region at a level that no other nation has. But we don't want to, frankly, put our boots on the ground and remove the responsibility for those who live in the region to fight their own fights. And this is part of a broader Shia-Sunni conflict. It's also a part of a broader secular Islamic conflict. Turkey and Qatar now are the primary nations that are supporting the Islamist governments in the region. So whether it's Egypt or Libya or Tunisia or elsewhere, and in fact the same is true in Gaza, both Turkey and Qatar are the primary funders of the Muslim Brotherhood governments or parties in the region, much to the concern not of the United States, but of the UAE and other more moderate nations in the region who are concerned with what those Islamist trends may bring.
And the public kind of reaction over this ISIS takes us back to 2003, where, you know, since 2003 we have spent trillions of taxpayer dollars in Iraq, and right now we're going back. Are we going back to war again in that region?
Well, unfortunately, I think the answer is yes. I mean, I consider what we're doing now to be war. And there seems to be some schizophrenia about that. Is this war or is it not? But frankly, whether we have boots on the ground or not, if we're flying sorties and we're bombing people and resupplying them, it certainly looks like war to me, and I'm sure if you're on the ground, it looks like war to you. It doesn't mean that we're going to occupy these countries again, and I think that would be a big mistake, both because we now have great experience in occupying countries for long periods of time with very limited utility. If you look at Afghanistan now, we've been there over 13 years. The Taliban are now starting to surge again in the north, where they had not been strong before. They're trying to surge in the south. The new government in Afghanistan has got more than its hands full, as we are drawing down our troops after such a long period, even though we're keeping a sizable contingent still there in a support role. So the massive occupation, if the political problems aren't resolved, isn't a good recipe. It is a good recipe for an expenditure of a lot of U.S. dollars and the risk of a lot of U.S. lives. So I think it makes sense for us to try a different approach and not seek to step in and fight the fights of others. We certainly don't want to step in the middle of a Sunni-Shia fight that's been going on for millennia. We can't win that fight. And ultimately, the Iraqis, for example, are going to have to decide, much like the Syrians are they going to be one country or are they going to be two or three? And if Iraq is to be one country, it means they're going to have to make very significant concessions to the Kurds and significant concessions to their Sunni population, which is a sizable part of that country.
And again, I'm coming back to Turkey because in 2003, when the U.S. forces were ready to invade Iraq, again, Turkey basically disallowed the U.S. to use its own airbase in Incirlik, and they're doing the same thing right now.
I'd go beyond that, and this is one of the things that many of us were calling out at the time. You had parliamentarians in Turkey accusing us of genocide in Iraq, and our own government unwilling to use the word genocide where it really did apply in terms of what the Ottoman Empire perpetrated against the Armenian people. So it is staggering to me that we still believe that it's in our national interest to become complicit in Turkey's campaign of genocide denial. This, I think, is appalling no matter how close a relationship, no matter who the ally was, but is all the more inexplicable when you consider what a fair weather relationship we often have with Turkey.
And the images coming out of there with the Kurds and the Yazidis are such a interesting reminder of the same images that we see when we talk about the genocide. So when we come back, I want to kind of follow up on this U.S. response to this and move on to other important issues. We are before an election, so I'm sure there's a lot to talk about to the constituents. We'll be right back. Stay tuned. Welcome back, everyone. I'm continuing my conversation with Representative Adam Schiff. Thank you once again for coming to the studio. We're talking about Turkey's role in the conflict right now vis-a-vis ISIS. But I'm also looking at the U.S. response, sort of a disparity, as if you will, in the last couple of months about various different crises. Here is the U.S. imposing these rather rough sanctions on Russia for annexing Crimea and moving into Ukraine. But what Turkey is doing right now, I think, warrants some kind of a sanction from the United States. Why is this disparity going on? And we've definitely seen the disparity by the U.S. vis-a-vis the Karabakh conflict. So,
well, as disappointing as the Turkish reaction has been to our efforts to form this coalition to go after ISIS, it is still a very different situation than Russia invading its neighbors and claiming its territory as its own. Nonetheless, I do think we have to be much stronger with Turkey. They have to become a full partner in going after this, not only because we ask them to, but it's in their own national interest to do so. They're going to have a major militant problem on their own hands if they fail to deal with this. Already, the fact that Turkey largely stood by as Kobani was under assault has resulted in widespread demonstrations throughout Turkey by the very large Kurdish population within that country. So it's certainly in our interest, it's in the international community's interest, it's in Turkey's interest to be a much more fulsome member of this coalition and to recognize that while it leaves that border still penetrable by foreign fighters, it risks its own security when those foreign fighters come home, as they will one day. So this is a threat not only to the international community, but it's a threat to Turkey, and it's going to have to be dealt with.
Let's come back to a congressional measure, and this the support for which was echoed by the new U.S. ambassador to Turkey about the whole return of the churches initiative that Congress has voted for in the past. What is the mechanism by which the U.S. can kind of tell Turkey to do its part in addressing the churches issue?
Well, we can, certainly bring leadership pressure to bear on Turkey to provide and make sure that these properties are restored to their rightful owners, make sure that historic sites are maintained as historic sites, not only with our bilateral relationship with Turkey, but also working through multilateral organizations like UNESCO to make sure that historically significant sites are protected. We don't have an enforcement mechanism in the statute that we were able to get through the House, and now are working on getting through the Senate. There's no way that we can, for example, use our courts to compel Turkish action vis-a-vis a particular site located in Turkey. But it's something that we need to continually raise within the bilateral relationship, make a priority when we have meetings with Turkish officials. That's a long list, given what's going on with ISIS. But it's very important, and using that kind of leadership and moral leverage, I think, is really our best hope of getting them to restore these properties to the rightful owners.
So the rug, ISIS, everything else, all of this is happening on the eve of the genocide centennial. How do you think the U.S. response is going to be impacted by all of these compounded events that are happening right now?
Well, it's a grave concern because, as you've seen and we all have, each time the genocide comes up, each April, when this becomes the dominant focus within the community, the administration finds a new reason, the leadership in Congress finds a new reason why this year just isn't the right year. Well, the centennial is the right year. It's always been the right year. And, back in 03, 04, it was, well, we need Turkish support for logistics and in Iraq or in Afghanistan, or, they've started reconciliation talks, or there's this new TARP process, or every year it's something else. This year I am confident the excuse, if they wish to find one, both in Congress and the administration, will be, well, we need Turkish help here and we can't afford to offend them. How long are we going to go on with that? I mean, it's been 100 years. I was in Ankara a few months ago, as you know. I raised the genocide issue in a meeting I had with Erdogan and with then President Gül. It's important for us to continue to push on this. It was a very interesting meeting. Our former ambassador was present, and I made many of the points that I know my constituents would want to make had they been sitting in those meetings. And I told both how there was an Armenian constituent in my district who had not been personally affected, that had not lost a loved one, a grandparent, a parent, an aunt, an uncle, or a whole side of their family. And to say, as the Prime Minister, then Prime Minister, now President, did, that, well, there couldn't have been a genocide because there's still Armenians left.
Yeah.
I told them would be the equivalent of saying that, well, then there couldn't have been a Holocaust because there's still Jews left.
Yeah.
Those are preposterous things to say. And, I think if there is a ray of light in all of this, it's that average Turks, I think, are increasingly aware of the history, because you can't, in this globalized environment where information is trafficked so heavily online, you cannot hermetically seal your people off unless you're North Korea. And Turkey is not North Korea. So
they attempted by closing down YouTube.
Yes, they did. They did. They attempted to shut off Twitter and YouTube and these other things. You're absolutely right. Interesting, though, that was not over the genocide. That was over the corruption allegations. But nonetheless, I think it's part of the reason why, on the anniversary of the murder of Hrant Dink, you see thousands of Turks, marching with placards that say, "I am Hrant Dink," and I think that's very important. The government recognition, our own government, the Turkish government, is pivotal, but the recognition of the people is ultimately the goal.
Let's move to Gharabagh very quickly. Something interesting happened kind of over the summer, started at the late spring. Both houses of the California legislature passed resolutions expressing the state's support for the right to self-determination of the people of Artsakh, urged Congress and the president to do so. Do you think we'll see something like that in the next Congress, where members of Congress will come together to advocate for self-determination, which is something that our country stands for here in the United States?
Well, I would love to see resolutions of support for the right of self-determination of the people in Artsakh. I think that's going to be a difficult lift, given how hard it was just to get a rug displayed.
Yeah.
But as you point out, it's consistent with our own history. It's consistent with American values. I also had the opportunity to participate in a Helsinki Commission meeting in Baku recently, where I was proud to be able to support resolutions that were made in Baku by the Armenian delegation from Armenia that called for a peaceful resolution of the conflict in Artsakh. Resolutions that the delegation from Azerbaijan, the host city, voted against. I was proud to vote for, and I was even prouder to see pass over the opposition of the host country. But one of the other issues that I'm working on, this is a very small piece, but I think an important one, is there are demining efforts that have been going on. But those demining efforts along the line of control have been circumscribed by whether they're within a certain zone or not, even though outside of the zone where many people live and work and kids walk around, we now have more mines. And yet there's opposition to using resources to demine there because the areas are contested by Azerbaijan. Meanwhile, kids are getting blown up.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to batter down that bureaucratic and diplomatic impasse to make sure those operations can go forward.
And of course, we're watching closely the peace process. There's supposed to be a meeting at the Palais Élysée next week between the presidents of Armenia and Azerbaijan, and let's see what comes out of it. Hopefully something good.
Well, I do want to mention this, and this is another cause for concern. When I was in Baku, among other things, we met with some of the representatives of free society in Baku, who are very much under the gun, sometimes quite literally. They've been arrested. We met with family members of those under arrest for just standing out for peaceful right of assembly and the right of speech. There's increasing, I think, domestic discontent with the leadership Aliyev. And sometimes when that happens, you see the reaction is to provoke a military confrontation. So I am increasingly concerned with the kind of belligerent rhetoric coming out of Azerbaijan, with the increasing incidence of sniper fire along the line of control, the provocations by the Azeri forces, trying to pick a fight as a way, I think, of distracting attention from some of the domestic problems.
So you represent in your district the largest concentration of Armenians in the United States. Your district covers a wide swath of region with Armenians living there. The elections are November 4th, and I am going to urge our viewers to definitely vote on November 4th. What can we look forward to here in the district in the coming months after the elections and before the new Congress?
Well, there are some very exciting things that we're working on locally. One of them is a brand new park that would be in very close to Little Armenia, actually. It would be the Hollywood Central Park, capping the 101 freeway. It's a fantastic project that will bring a huge new park to one of the poorest parts of Los Angeles. We're already seeing some benefits in the neighborhood by the declaration of this area as a promise zone by the administration. So we're seeing funding coming in to help at-risk youth and a lot of the NGOs that work with young people. We're also seeing, finally, after a lot of work, some relief on the helicopter noise front as the FAA is moving to establish a comprehensive complaint system so that homeowners that are renters alike who are plagued with helicopter noise hovering over the Hollywood Hills or elsewhere may have some relief in sight, I hope. And we're also coming up to the conclusion of something I put in motion about a decade ago, a study of the rim of the valley, those beautiful mountains that ring our area, the foothills where a very large Armenian community resides, and all of us that like to go into the mountains and the forest. The Park Service is completing a report as to whether we should expand the Santa Monica Mountains Recreation Area to include these areas or establish a brand new recreation area to protect these wildlife corridors and recreation opportunities. So that will be coming to a conclusion later this year, and I'll be encouraging people to weigh in with their support for open space so that we can then take the next step legislatively to make it happen and expand our park system.
Well, good luck to you on November 4th.
Thank you.
And thank you again for coming and joining us. I'm sure we'll have you back again soon. And see you in Washington on November 18th.
18th to the 23rd.
So a couple of dates to remember. First of all, November 4th is election day, and if you want your voice heard, you better go out to the polls and vote. And the second date is November 18th, where the Armenian Orphan Rug will be exhibited at the White House Visitor Center. Thank you once again to Congressman Schiff for joining us again. We'll have you back real soon. And thanks for everyone at home for watching our program, and see you next time.